The morning sun cast long shadows across the crystal spires of Zelano's prime, but Captain Kira Oshan felt no warmth from its light. She stood on the observation deck of the Defense Council building, watching as another of their outer settlements vanished in a cloud of dust and metal. The harvesters had arrived 3 months ago, and every day brought them closer to the heart of her world. Kira pressed her palm against the smooth wall and felt the gentle hum of the city's living architecture. The buildings on Zelano's prime were not built but grown, shaped by generations of careful harmony between the Zelani people and their world. Each structure pulsed with soft bioluminescence, creating networks of light that connected every corner of their civilization. It was beautiful, peaceful, and utterly defenseless against the machines that consumed everything in their path. The door behind her whispered open, and Elder Vash Karel entered with slow, measured steps. His ancient face bore the weight of watching his people face extinction, and his usually bright silver eyes had dimmed to a dull gray. "The southern continent is lost," he said softly, his words carrying the musical overtones that made Zelani speech sound like distant singing. "The harvesters have begun processing the crystal forests. Within days, they will strip everything down to the bedrock." Kira turned away from the window. She had been a starship navigator before the crisis began, mapping peaceful trade routes between Zelani worlds. War was a concept her people had only encountered in ancient historical records from other species. They had no weapons, no soldiers, no understanding of how to fight an enemy that saw them as nothing more than raw materials. "Have we received any responses to our distress signals?" she asked, though she already knew the answer from Vash's expression. The elder shook his head. 17 civilizations have acknowledged our transmissions. All have declined to assist." He moved to stand beside her at the window. The Altarians sent a formal apology, claiming their fleets are committed to border defense. The Centauri expressed sympathy, but stated that intervention would risk destabilizing the region. Even the Draknari, who pride themselves on martial honor, say the harvesters pose too great a threat. Kira felt the familiar weight of despair settle over her. The Zelani had always believed in the goodness of other species, in the idea that intelligence naturally led to compassion. They had traded peacefully with dozens of civilizations, sharing their biotechnology and artistic achievements freely. But when death came for them, they found themselves alone. "We must continue broadcasting," she said. "There has to be someone out there who will help." Far across the galaxy, in a small building in the California desert, Dr. Lisa Park rubbed her tired eyes and stared at the rows of data streaming across her computer screen. She had been working at the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence Institute for 8 years, and most days brought nothing but cosmic background radiation and the occasional burst from a distant pulsar. But today was different. "Jake, come look at this," she called to her colleague, who was hunched over his own workstation across the room. Jake Morrison wheeled his chair over, coffee cup in hand. He was younger than Lisa, fresh out of graduate school with degrees in communications and xenolinguistics. Most people thought his second degree was pointless since no one had ever found aliens to talk to, but Lisa valued his theoretical knowledge. "What have you got?" Jake asked, peering at the display. Lisa pointed to a series of repeating patterns in the signal analysis. "This came in on the deep space array about 6 hours ago. Look at the structure." Jake leaned closer, his eyes widening as he recognized what he was seeing. "Those are mathematical progressions. Prime numbers, Fibonacci sequences, basic geometric relationships." He looked up at Lisa with excitement. "This is artificial. Someone is trying to communicate." "That's what I thought," Lisa said, pulling up another screen. "But look at this part." She highlighted a section of the transmission that pulsed with different intensities. "If I'm reading this correctly, it's not just math. There's emotional content here. Urgency." Jake spent the next hour running the signal through various analysis programs while Lisa worked on isolating different components of the transmission. As the pattern became clearer, a chill ran down her spine. "Jake," she said quietly, "I think this is a distress call." The transmission contained layers of information that slowly revealed themselves as the two scientists worked through the night. Mathematical proofs that demonstrated peaceful intent, star charts showing the location of the signal's origin, crude pictographs that seemed to show a world under attack by mechanical invaders, and through it all, a countdown that made Lisa's blood run cold. "If I'm reading this correctly," she said as dawn light crept through the laboratory windows, Whoever sent this has less than 6 months before they're completely overrun. Jake had been working on another part of the signal, trying to understand the emotional undertones. Lisa, this isn't just a distress call. It's a plea. Listen to this. He played an audio interpretation of one section, and even filtered through human technology. The desperation was unmistakable. They've been broadcasting for months, Lisa realized. This same message over and over to anyone who might listen. She felt sick as the implications hit her. Jake, what if we're the only ones who are even paying attention? The two scientists spent the morning documenting everything they had found, preparing a report that would either make their careers or end them if they were wrong. The implications were staggering. Not only was this proof of intelligent alien life, but it was evidence of an ongoing interstellar conflict that humanity knew nothing about. Meanwhile, on Zelano's Prime, Captain Kira stood in the Defense Council's communications center, watching as another automated distress beacon was prepared for launch. The small crystalline device contained everything they could tell the galaxy about their situation, their location, the nature of the threat, their need for immediate assistance. The communications officer, a young Zelani named Paul Davin, looked up from his console with worried eyes. Captain, the beacon is ready for transmission. Should I include the cultural archives again? Kira nodded. Each beacon carried not just their plea for help, but samples of Zelani art, music, and philosophy. If their civilization was going to die, at least some record of what they had been might survive in the memory banks of other species. Send it on all frequencies, she ordered. Maximum power. As the beacon launched into space, carrying their message to distant stars, Kira allowed herself a moment of hope. Somewhere out there, in the vast darkness between worlds, there had to be someone who would hear their call and choose to act, someone who still believed that doing right mattered more than staying safe. She could not have known that her beacon would soon reach a small blue world where two humans worked through the night, determined to decode a message from the stars. She could not have imagined that on that distant planet, people still believed in helping strangers simply because it was the right thing to do. But across the galaxy, as the Harvesters continued their relentless advance and other civilizations turned away from Zelano's prime suffering, something was about to change. The plea that had echoed in silence for so long was finally going to find the answer the Zelani had never dared hope for. Dr. Lisa Park walked through the corridors of the Pentagon with Jake Morrison beside her, both carrying briefcases full of data that could change human history. 3 days had passed since they decoded the alien distress signal, and now they were about to present their findings to the highest levels of Earth's government and military. Admiral Helen Carter waited for them in Conference Room 7, along with representatives from every major spacefaring nation on Earth. Lisa had seen the Admiral on news broadcasts before, but meeting her in person was different. Carter was a tall woman with gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to measure everything around her. She had commanded Earth's first deep space exploration missions, and knew more about humanity's capabilities beyond their solar system than anyone else. Dr. Park, Mr. Morrison, Admiral Carter said as they entered the room, I've read your preliminary report. Before we begin, I want to be clear about something. What you're suggesting could commit humanity to a course of action that might destroy us. Are you absolutely certain about your translation of this signal? Lisa opened her briefcase and pulled out a tablet loaded with their analysis. Admiral, we've spent every hour of the last 3 days checking and rechecking our work. The mathematical components are clear, the star charts are accurate, and the countdown is unmistakable. She activated a holographic display that showed the signal structure. This is a civilization begging for help. They have maybe 5 months left before they're completely wiped out. Jake stepped forward, his young face serious despite his nervousness at addressing such high-ranking officials. Admiral, there's something else. We've been monitoring responses to their distress signal. At least 12 other civilizations have acknowledged receiving it. None of them are sending help. General Pete Collins, head of Earth's Strategic Defense Command, leaned forward in his chair. What kind of threat are we talking about? What is these other civilizations so scared that they won't help? Lisa pulled up another section of the data. From what we can understand, they call themselves the Harvesters. They appear to be self-replicating machines that consume entire worlds for raw materials. Think of them as a mechanical plague that spreads from system to system. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Admiral Carter studied the holographic display with the practiced eye of someone who had spent her life evaluating threats. Dr. Park, what you're describing sounds like something that could threaten every world in the galaxy, including ours. If these other civilizations are too frightened to act, what makes you think we could make a difference? We might not be able to, Lisa admitted. But Admiral, does that matter? These people are dying. They're crying out for help and everyone is ignoring them. If we don't try to help, what does that say about who we are as a species? Meanwhile, across the galaxy, other civilizations continued to debate the Zelani situation in their own ways. On Altair 4, the High Council of the Altarian Empire gathered in their golden chambers to discuss the ongoing crisis. The Altarians were an old and proud species who had built one of the largest interstellar empires in the galaxy through careful expansion and strategic thinking. Council leader Dar Mathis stood before the assembled representatives, his forearms gesturing as he spoke. The situation on Zelano's Prime grows worse each day. Our long-range sensors show that the harvesters have consumed nearly half the planet's surface. The Zelani population has been reduced by 60%. This is regrettable, said Councillor Versailles, her voice carrying the formal tones of diplomatic protocol. However, our military advisors have been clear. The harvester fleet consists of over 300 vessels, each larger than our biggest dreadnoughts. If we commit our forces to this battle and lose, the harvesters may target our worlds next. But surely we have some obligation to help, protested younger Councillor Jin Kovar. The Zelani have been our trading partners for generations. They shared their biotechnology with us freely, asking nothing in return. Council Leader Mothis nodded sadly. Yes, they have been good neighbors, but we must think of the greater good. The Altarian Empire protects over 40 worlds and 2 billion citizens. We cannot risk all of their lives for one world, no matter how much we might wish to help. The debate continued for hours, but the conclusion was inevitable. The Altarians would send medical supplies and emergency food to refugee camps on nearby worlds, but their military would not engage the harvesters. The risk was simply too great. Similar conversations took place throughout the galaxy. On Centauri Prime, the collective of minds ran complex probability calculations that showed any intervention had less than a 12% chance of success. The wise Centauri, who had preserved knowledge and culture for thousands of years, concluded that risking their civilization for such slim odds would be illogical. The warrior clans of the Draknari Federation, despite their code of honor that celebrated dying in battle, also chose to avoid the conflict. Their war chiefs argued that there was no honor in pointless death, and fighting the harvesters would be suicide, not heroism. Back on Zelano's Prime, the situation grew more desperate by the day. Elder Vash Karel stood in the ruins of what had once been the eastern city of Meridian, now nothing but scattered crystals and torn earth. Harvester mining drones moved through the wreckage like metallic insects, stripping away everything of value and leaving only barren soil behind. Captain Kira Oshan had aged years in the past few weeks. The constant stress of coordinating evacuations and trying to find safe zones for refugees had worn her down. She approached the elder with a datapad in her hands, her expression grim. The latest reports from our scouts, she said, handing him the device. The harvesters have established a processing station in orbit. They're not just mining our world anymore, Vash, they're preparing to strip the atmosphere itself. The elder looked at the data with weary eyes. How long do we have? Maybe 3 months before the air becomes unbreathable. Less if they speed up the process. Kira looked up at the sky where the harvester station was visible as a dark spot against the blue. We've sent over 100 distress signals now. 17 species have responded, all to say they cannot help us. Perhaps they are right to be afraid, Vash said quietly. The harvesters are unlike anything our galaxy has seen before. They have no leaders to negotiate with, no weaknesses to exploit. They simply consume and move on to the next world. But we cannot simply give up, Kira said, as long as our transmitters still work. As long as we can still send our plea into the void, we must keep trying. Somewhere out there, someone must be willing to help. She did not know that on Earth, President Alex Turner was calling an emergency session of the World Council. She could not have imagined that in military bases across the human homeworld, officers were studying star charts and calculating how long it would take to reach Zelano's Prime. Back in the Pentagon, Admiral Carter dismissed the other officials and asked Lisa and Jake to remain behind. I want to understand something, she said once they were alone. You've made it clear that this is likely a suicide mission. Every advanced civilization in the galaxy has decided it's too dangerous to attempt. What makes you think a species that just achieved faster than light travel 20 years ago should try where they have failed? Jake looked at Lisa, then back at the Admiral. Maybe because we're too new to know we should be afraid. Or maybe because we haven't learned to calculate the worth of strangers based on what it costs to help them. Lisa nodded. Admiral, I know the odds are against us. I know we might lose every ship we send and accomplish nothing. But I also know that if we don't try, we'll spend the rest of human history knowing that when someone cried for help, we chose to look the other way. Admiral Carter was quiet for a long moment, staring at the star charts that showed the impossible distance to Zelano's prime. Finally, she spoke. I'll present your findings to the President tomorrow. God help us all, but I think you might be right. As night fell over both Earth and the dying world of Zelano's prime, two species prepared to discover what they were truly made of. The Zelani continued their desperate broadcasts, while humans began to ask themselves a question that would define their place in the galaxy. When someone needs help, does it matter what it costs to provide it? President Alex Turner stood at the window of the Oval Office, looking out at the Washington Monument as the first light of dawn crept across the sky. In 12 hours, he would address the United Nations and announce a decision that could either mark humanity's emergence as a galactic power or its complete destruction. The weight of that choice pressed down on him like a physical force. Behind him, Admiral Carter sat at the conference table with General Collins and Secretary of Defense Maria Santos. They had been debating through the night, going over every aspect of what military analysts were calling Operation Lighthouse. The name had come from Colonel Matt Barnes, who said they were trying to be a beacon of hope in the darkness of space. Tell me again about our chances, President Turner said without turning from the window. Admiral Carter opened a folder full of tactical assessments. Mr. President, if we're being honest, our chances of military victory are close to zero. The Harvesters have over 300 ships, some of them the size of small cities. Our entire deep space fleet consists of 12 vessels, and none of them were built for this kind of warfare. General Collins nodded grimly. Our ships are explorers and cargo haulers, not battleships. The Harvesters have been perfecting their technology for centuries, consuming entire civilizations. We've been in space for barely 20 years. But there are things in our favor. Colonel Barnes interjected from his seat near the door. He was a lean man with scars on his face from Earth's last major war, and his eyes held the steady gaze of someone who had seen combat and survived. The Harvesters fight like machines because that's what they are. They follow patterns, use predictable strategies. Humans don't. Secretary Santos leaned forward. What do you mean? Every other species in the galaxy seems to fight by rules, Barnes explained. Honor codes, traditional tactics, predictable responses to threats. The Harvesters have learned to counter all of that, but they've never faced humans in a real fight. They don't know how dirty we can get when survival is on the line. President Turner finally turned from the window. Colonel, are you saying we should go into this planning to lose? No, sir, Barnes replied. I'm saying we should go in planning to win by any means necessary. The Harvesters expect their enemies to fight like civilized species. We're going to fight like humans. 3 hours later, President Turner stood before the United Nations General Assembly. Representatives from every nation on Earth filled the hall, along with observers from the colonies on Mars and the mining stations in the asteroid belt. The President had called this emergency session without explaining why, and the speculation had been intense. Members of the General Assembly, Turner began. 3 days ago, our scientists intercepted a distress signal from a dying world. I am here to tell you that we are not alone in the universe, and that our neighbors need our help. The hall erupted in shocked murmurs as Turner displayed the data that Lisa and Jake had decoded. Images of the Zelani homeworld, the mathematical proofs of their peaceful nature, and the countdown that showed their rapidly approaching extinction, filled the massive screens around the chamber. The civilization calling for help has been ignored by every other species in the galaxy, Turner continued. 12 advanced civilizations have received their plea and chosen to do nothing. Today I am asking this assembly to authorize humanity's first military action in interstellar space. I am asking you to help us answer a cry for help that everyone else has chosen to ignore. The debate that followed was intense and emotional. Some delegates argued that humanity had no business interfering in galactic affairs. Others pointed out that the Harvesters might eventually threaten Earth itself, making this a matter of self-defense. But in the end, the decision came down to something simpler than politics or strategy. Dr. Lisa Park, speaking as a special advisor to the president, put it best: we have a choice to make about who we want to be as a species. Do we want to be the kind of people who calculate the cost of helping others? Or do we want to be the kind who help because it's right? The vote was closer than Turner had hoped, but humanity chose to act. Within hours, Admiral Carter was aboard the flagship Earth's Hope, preparing to lead humanity's first interstellar military mission. The human fleet was small, but determined. Besides the flagship, there were cruisers named New Frontier, Liberty's Edge, and Defiant Spirit. The assault carrier Courage, commanded by Captain Ryan Walsh, carried 300 Marines who had volunteered for what everyone knew was likely a one-way mission. Dr. Lisa Park joined the expedition as the fleet's expert on alien communication, determined to be there when humanity made contact with the Zelano. As the ships prepared to depart from Earth orbit, their final transmissions were intercepted by monitoring stations across the galaxy. The reaction from other civilizations was swift and varied. On Altair 4, Council leader Dar Mothus called an emergency session after receiving intelligence about the human fleet. "This is unprecedented," he told the assembled counselors. "A species that achieved interstellar travel less than 3 decades ago is attempting what we deemed impossible." "It's admirable," said Counselor Jin Kovar, "but it's also foolish. They're sending 12 ships against a force that we calculated would require at least 50 of our best vessels to have any chance of success." "Perhaps," Mothus replied, "but I confess I am curious to see what happens. There is something about these humans that is different from other species we have encountered." The Centauri Collective had a similar reaction. Their greatest philosophers gathered in the Crystal Archives to analyze human behavior patterns based on the intercepted transmissions. "Logically, this action makes no sense," observed prime thinker Zal Korin. "They have no strategic advantage, no hope of meaningful victory, and no existing alliance with the threatened species. Yet they proceed anyway. It suggests either supreme confidence or complete irrationality," noted another philosopher. "Or," Zal Korin said thoughtfully, "it suggests a species that operates by principles we have forgotten how to understand." Even the warrior clans of the Draknari took notice. War Chief Grak Stonefist studied the human fleet composition with the eye of a professional soldier. "Their ships are weak," he growled to his advisors, "but their warriors have fire in their hearts. I have not seen such courage since the ancient days when my people first took to the stars. Should we assist them?" asked one of his lieutenants. Grak was quiet for a long moment. "No, but we will watch. If these humans somehow succeed where we feared to try, it will change how the galaxy sees courage itself." Meanwhile, on the dying world of Zelano's Prime, Captain Kira Ocean stood in the communication center as her technicians worked frantically to boost their transmission array. Elder Vash Coral had told her about a new signal they had detected, something different from the polite but empty responses they had received from other civilizations. "Captain," called Paul Davin from his console, his voice tight with excitement, "I'm picking up a transmission directed specifically at us. The signal pattern is unlike anything we've seen before." "Put it through the translators," Kira ordered. What came through the speakers was rough and mechanical compared to the musical quality of Galactic standard communications, but the message was unmistakable. "This is Admiral Helen Carter of the United Earth Fleet, responding to your distress signal. We have received your call for help and are coming to assist you. Hold on. Help is on the way." Kira felt her knees go weak with relief and disbelief. After months of silence from the galaxy, someone had finally answered. But as she looked at the tactical display showing the Harvester fleet orbiting her world, she wondered if these humans understood what they were flying into. Elder Vash joined her at the communications station, his old eyes bright with tears. "They sound so young," he said softly. "This species, these humans, they sound like children who still believe the galaxy can be a good place." "Maybe that's what it takes," Kira replied, watching the Harvester drones continue their relentless work outside the windows. "Maybe you have to be young enough to believe in impossible things." As the human fleet made its 3-month journey through space toward Zelano's Prime, their message spread throughout the galaxy. Some species called it noble, others called it suicidal, but all of them watched with growing interest as a species that barely knew how to navigate between stars prepared to face an enemy that had destroyed civilizations older than human history. The Zelanis. Plea had finally found its answer, and that answer was going to change everything. Admiral Helen Carter stood on the bridge of the Earth's Hope, staring at the tactical display that showed what remained of Zelano's prime. After 3 months of travel through the void, the human fleet had finally arrived at the Zelani homeworld, and the sight was worse than any of them had imagined. Half the planet's surface was gone. Where once there had been continents covered in crystal cities and green forests, now there was only scarred rock and the geometric patterns of strip mining operations. Massive harvester ships hung in orbit like metal mountains, each one 10 times larger than humanity's biggest vessel. Smaller craft moved between the surface and the orbital stations, carrying loads of processed materials up from the dying world below. "My God," whispered Captain Ryan Walsh from the assault carrier Courage. His voice came through the fleet communication channel with a mixture of horror and anger. How many people lived on that world? Dr. Lisa Park, working at the communication station, had been trying to establish contact with any surviving Zelani for the past hour. According to their earlier transmissions, the population was around 800 million. Now I'm detecting maybe 60 million life signs, mostly concentrated in underground shelters on the northern continent. 60 million, Admiral Carter repeated quietly. The numbers were staggering. In just a few months, the harvesters had killed nearly 90% of an entire civilization. "Dr. Park, can you reach the survivors?" "I'm trying, Admiral. The harvesters seem to be jamming most frequencies, but I think I can get through on one of the harmonic channels the Zelani use for emergency communications." As Lisa worked to establish contact, Carter studied the enemy fleet with the cold eye of a professional military officer. The harvesters had arranged their ships in a perfect defensive formation around the planet, with the largest vessels positioned to protect the orbital processing stations. It was a logical, efficient deployment that any military academy would have approved of. That was exactly what Carter had been hoping to see. "Colonel Barnes," she called to her tactical officer. "Analysis?" Matt Barnes had been studying the harvester formation for the past 20 minutes, and his scarred face bore a grim smile. "They're fighting exactly like machines, Admiral. Perfect formation, logical positioning, textbook deployment. They've arranged themselves to counter any conventional attack." "Good thing we're not planning a conventional attack," Carter replied. The plan they had developed during the long journey to Zelano's prime was born from desperation and human stubbornness. Every other species in the galaxy seemed to fight according to established rules of warfare, with honor codes and traditional tactics that the harvesters had learned to counter. But humans had a different approach to fighting when their backs were against the wall. "Captain Walsh," Carter said into the fleet communicator, "prepare your Marines for boarding operations. We're going to take this fight inside their ships where their size advantage won't matter." "Understood, Admiral. My people are ready." The first phase of the battle began when the human fleet split up in ways that made no tactical sense. Instead of staying together for mutual protection, the ships scattered across the Zelano system, each one heading for different targets. The harvesters, programmed to respond to logical threats, divided their forces to intercept each human vessel. This was exactly what Carter wanted. Captain Steve Chen, commanding the destroyer Relentless, was the first to engage the enemy. His ship was small and fast, designed for reconnaissance rather than combat, but Chen used that to his advantage. Instead of fighting the massive harvester dreadnought that came to intercept him, he led it on a chase through the asteroid field at the edge of the system. "Relentless to flagship," Chen reported as his ship dodged between floating rocks while the harvester vessel tried to target him. "I've got their attention." Beginning Phase 2. Phase 2 was where human unpredictability really showed itself. Instead of trying to damage the harvester ship's weapons or engines, Chen aimed for something no other species had ever targeted. He fired everything his ship had at the harvester's communication array. The massive alien vessel began to slow down, its movements becoming erratic as it lost contact with the central command network. Without constant updates from the hive mind that controlled all harvester operations, the individual ship began to make mistakes, to hesitate at crucial moments. "It worked," Chen called out in triumph. "The thing is fighting like it's half blind now." Across the system, other human ships began similar attacks. The cruiser New Frontier, commanded by Captain Beth Rogers, used its mining lasers to cut through the hull of a harvester processing ship. Not to destroy it, but to get inside where her crew could wreak havoc on the internal systems. The Liberty's Edge rammed straight through a group of smaller harvester craft, using its reinforced hull as a battering ram in a way that defied every principle of space combat. But the real breakthrough came when Dr. Lisa Park finally established communication with the Zelani survivors. Captain Kira Ocean's voice came through the static-filled channel like a gift from heaven. "Human vessels, this is Captain Kira of the Zelani Defense Council. We cannot believe you are here. How can we help?" Lisa quickly explained what the human fleet was trying to accomplish. "Captain Kira, we need to know about harvester weaknesses. How do they coordinate their operations?" "There is a central hub," Kira replied, her musical voice tight with hope. "A massive ship at the center of their formation. It controls all the others through quantum entanglement. If that ship were destroyed, the entire fleet would become confused." Carter felt a chill of excitement. "Where is this hub ship?" "The largest vessel in orbit, surrounded by 6 defensive platforms. But it's impossible to reach. We've tried everything." "Captain Kira," Carter said into the communicator, "you've never tried it the human way. The assault on the hub ship was the kind of plan that would have horrified any civilized military commander. Captain Steve Chen volunteered to ram the Relentless straight through the Harvester defensive line, using his ship's nuclear reactor as a guided bomb. His crew, all volunteers, would stay with the ship until the last moment, then evacuate in escape pods that probably wouldn't survive the explosion." "Admiral," Chen said over a private channel, "it's been an honor serving with you." "The honor has been mine, Steve," Carter replied. "Give them hell." As the Relentless began its final run toward the hub ship, the rest of the human fleet launched everything they had to clear a path. The cruiser Guardian, commanded by Captain Tony Kim, positioned itself between Chen's ship and the heaviest harvester defenses, taking massive damage to protect the destroyer's approach. The Valiant, under Captain Lisa Stone, used its last missiles to knock out 2 of the defensive platforms, its hull cracking under return fire, but holding together through pure human engineering stubbornness. Lieutenant Commander Joe Parker kept his crippled cruiser Phoenix in the fight even after losing main power, using backup systems and emergency batteries to continue firing at harvester targets. "Not dead yet," he called out as his ship limped through space, trailing debris but still fighting. Dr. Park, monitoring Zelani communications from the flagship, heard Captain Kira rallying her people. "They're fighting for us," the Zelani captain was telling her surviving population. "These humans have come across the galaxy to help strangers. We cannot let their sacrifice be meaningless." Suddenly, Zelani fighters began emerging from hidden underground hangars, small crystalline ships that had been kept in reserve for this moment. They weren't built for war, but they could serve as distractions, drawing harvester fire away from the human vessels. The combined human and Zelani assault created enough chaos for Chen to reach his target. The Relentless, battered and burning but still flying, smashed through the final defensive screen around the hub ship. Chen waited until the last possible second, then detonated his reactor core deep inside the harvester vessel. The explosion lit up the entire system. When the light faded, the massive hub ship was gone, taking with it the quantum communication network that controlled the entire harvester fleet. Across the battlefield, the enemy ships began to drift aimlessly, their coordination broken, their hive mind severed. "All ships," Admiral Carter broadcast to her battered fleet, "the enemy is confused and vulnerable. Now we finish this fight." The silence after Captain Chen's sacrifice was broken only by the crackling of damaged communication systems and the distant sound of debris hitting ship hulls. Admiral Helen Carter stared at the tactical display, hardly believing what she was seeing. The massive harvester fleet, which moments before had moved with perfect coordination, now drifted through space like abandoned toys. "Admiral," called Lieutenant Sarah Wells from the sensor station, her voice filled with amazement. "The harvester ships have stopped all coordinated movement. They're just floating there, individual units with no central command. All ships? Report status," Carter ordered into her communicator. The responses came in one by one, each telling the same story of heavy damage but surviving crews. The Guardian had lost half its hull plating but was still operational. The Valiant was leaking atmosphere but holding together. The Phoenix, incredibly, was still fighting despite having no main power, and a crew that was operating on backup life support. Captain Ryan Walsh's voice came through from the assault carrier Courage. "Admiral, my Marines are ready to board the remaining Harvester vessels. Without their coordination, we can take them apart piece by piece." "Do it," Carter replied. "Dr. Park, can you reach the Zelani again?" Lisa Park had been working frantically at her station, trying to re-establish contact with the planet's surface. "I've got them, Admiral. Captain Kira is coordinating with surviving Zelani fighters. They're moving to attack the confused Harvester drones." What followed was unlike any battle in recorded galactic history. Instead of the organized, predictable warfare that other civilizations practiced, it was a chaotic mix of desperate human tactics and Zelani improvisation. Human Marines, led by Sergeant Amy Rodriguez, used cutting torches and explosives to fight their way through Harvester ships that had never been designed to repel boarders. The machines had always relied on their coordination and superior firepower, never imagining that enemies would actually climb inside their vessels to fight hand-to-hand. Meanwhile, the Zelani surprised everyone, including themselves, with their ability to adapt. Captain Kira led her crystalline fighters in attacks on Harvester mining equipment, using their intimate knowledge of their homeworld to guide precise strikes against the most important targets. The Zelani had never been warriors, but watching their world die had awakened something fierce in their peaceful hearts. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it was over, the Harvester fleet was destroyed, reduced to drifting hulks that would never threaten another world. But the cost had been terrible. Of the 12 ships that had left Earth, only 4 remained operational. Hundreds of human crew members had given their lives, and thousands more were injured. Admiral Carter stood in the medical bay of the Earth's Hope, looking down at Lieutenant Commander Joe Parker, who had been pulled from his crippled ship just before its life support failed completely. He was unconscious but alive, representing the spirit that had carried humanity through its first major test among the stars. "Admiral," Dr. Park called from the doorway, "you need to see this." Carter followed Lisa to the communications center, where incoming messages were flooding in from across the galaxy. The first was from the Altarian Empire, and Council Leader Darmothis appeared on the main screen, his forearm spread in a gesture of respect. "Admiral Carter of Earth," he said, his formal diplomatic tone replaced by something much more personal. "The Altarian Empire witnessed your victory over the Harvesters. We are ashamed that we did not stand with you in this fight. We offer our shipyards, our medical facilities, and our friendship to help repair your fleet and heal your wounded." More messages followed. The Centauri Collective offered to share their advanced technology with humanity, saying that a species capable of such sacrifice deserved access to their greatest scientific achievements. Even the proud Draknari Federation sent a message of respect, with War Chief Grak Stonefist declaring that humans had shown courage worthy of the greatest warriors in galactic history. But the most important message came from Zelano's Prime itself. Captain Kira Oshan appeared on screen, standing in what looked like a crystal cave filled with Zelani survivors. Her people gathered behind her, their bioluminescent skin glowing softly in the dim light. "People of Earth," she said, her musical voice carrying across the vast distance between worlds. "You answered our call when no one else would. You risked everything for strangers you had never met. The Zelani people will remember this for all time. We offer you our eternal friendship and alliance." Elder Vash Coral stepped forward, his ancient face showing tears that sparkled like jewels. "Your species has given us something we thought was lost forever. Hope. Hope that goodness still exists in the galaxy, that someone will always answer when the innocent cry for help." Admiral Carter felt her own eyes growing wet as she responded. "Captain Kira, Elder Vash, we did what any decent people should do. No one should face extinction alone." In the weeks that followed, as human and Zelani crews worked together to repair the damaged ships and begin rebuilding the shattered world, something remarkable happened. The story of humanity's intervention spread throughout the galaxy, carried by traders, diplomats, and communications networks that reached every corner of known space. On worlds that had never heard of Earth, people began talking about the species that had traveled impossible distances to help strangers. Children of a dozen different civilizations heard bedtime stories about the humans who refused to let the innocent die alone. More importantly, the example began to change how other species thought about their responsibilities to their neighbors. The Altarians restructured their military to include rapid response fleets dedicated to helping worlds under attack. The Centauri established new philosophical schools that studied what they called the courage to act despite uncertainty. Even the Draknari began offering their protection to smaller, peaceful worlds, saying that true warriors defended those who could not defend themselves. 6 months after the battle, President Alex Turner addressed a joint session of the Earth Congress and the newly established Galactic Council. Representatives from 17 different species sat in the assembly hall, including Captain Kira Ocean as the first Zelani ambassador to Earth. "When we first detected the Zelani distress signal," Turner said, "we faced a choice that defined who we are as a species. We could have calculated the odds, weighed the costs, and chosen the safe path that others had taken. Instead, we chose to answer a cry for help, knowing we might not survive the attempt." He paused, looking out at the assembled delegates from across the galaxy. "Today I am proud to announce the formation of the Mutual Defense Alliance, a coalition of worlds committed to ensuring that no civilization will ever again face extinction, while others stand by in silence. When someone calls for help, they will receive an answer." The applause that followed came from beings with different numbers of arms, different types of voices, and completely different ways of thinking about the universe. But they were united in their recognition that something fundamental had changed in galactic civilization. Dr. Lisa Park, now serving as Earth's chief xenological advisor, stood with Jake Morrison on the observation deck of the rebuilt Zelani capital city. The crystal spires were growing again, reaching toward a sky that was free of harvester ships for the first time in months. "Do you think we did the right thing?" Jake asked, watching Zelani children play in the bioluminescent gardens below. Lisa smiled, remembering the desperate transmission they had decoded in a small laboratory in California. "Jake, look around. We didn't just save one world. We reminded an entire galaxy what it means to have courage." High above them, the newest additions to Earth's fleet patrolled the system alongside Zelani bioships and vessels from a dozen other species. The ships bore names like Hope's Answer, Never Alone, and Courage Remembered, each one a reminder that someone, somewhere, was always listening for those who needed help. The plea that had once echoed in silence had found its answer, and that answer had changed everything. In a galaxy that had forgotten how to take risks for strangers, humanity had reminded everyone what it truly meant to be civilized. And in the endless void between stars, new distress signals were being answered by fleets flying the flags of worlds that had learned, from a young and stubborn species called humanity, that some things were worth fighting for regardless of the cost.